be our president. But I do want to say something, and this is really important.
Okay.
There are people who are not white, straight Christian males who are truly terrified for their safety right now, because there are people who support Donald Trump who are going around and are terrorizing people, and these reports are coming out all the time.
Stop it! You know what, Coco?
You as a supporter,
you know what? Donald Trump is not the president yet.
And you
as a supporter, I'm not saying it's Donald Trump. You
as a supporter of Donald Trump and Donald Trump owe an obligation to this country to say something, to say that we need to be peaceful, and to say to your own people that we are all Americans and we deserve safety and peace. And you as a supporter owe it to this country to say it.
Election night, he said exactly that. He handled it with complete class and elegance.
People are being terrorized on the streets.
Has divided this country, Coco.
No.
People are being what? Then
forget it. Barack Obama is almost done. Barack Obama is almost done. Barack Obama is almost finished with his term. And what I'm telling you is,
Coco,
even if you don't believe it, there are people who are terrified of your supporters.
My supporters, Coco, let me ask you a question.
Donald Trump supporters and your supporters.
Coco,
and you need to denounce this now.
Coco, you need to stop. I spent 30 years in law enforcement. If someone is hurting you, you go to the police, you get them prosecuted, you go to jail.
Yes,
stop
in a
blaming
perfect
Donald
world,
Trump.
that is the way you do it.
Trump,
there is a leadership problem right now.
On the floor, Coco. There is not a question on the floor.
Donald Trump needs to denounce this now.
My question is this. Barack Obama is the one who divided this country, and this election was a referendum on his policies, on his divisiveness, and what he has done to this country.
Let me answer that.
And that is why we are in this mess.
Let me answer that.
Answer it.
President Obama never stood up at a rally and said, hit that person, get him out of here. He never said that he wanted to build a wall and
you know what? We need to build a wall.
A whole group of people. He never said he wanted to keep Muslims out of the country. Donald Trump has done all of that. Now, Donald Trump is the president of the United States.
You know why? Because some Americans are having the necks cut off by Muslim jihadists. So get over it.
That's not an issue. But right now there are Americans that are terrified. Do you understand that, Judge?
Yeah,
there are Americans that are being terrorized on the streets.
And you know what? Here's the bottom line. You got a problem? Call the police. All right?
There are swastikas being painted on dormitories.
Joining us right now is Professor Jordan Peterson, as well as Professor A.W. Peet. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Professor Peterson, let's begin with you. Why are you against the use of alternate pronouns?
I'm against the use of legislation to determine what words that myself and other people are required to utter.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
Well, we have a graphic to show our audience at home, just some of the pronouns being used or asked to be used as alternates. Among them you see here Z or Zim, Z or here, Z or Zir, also hey, or a rather, and per. So just some of the alternate pronouns there. Professor Peet, when you hear Professor Peterson saying that this is oppressive, how do you respond to that?
The Peterson drama has done real harm to real people on campus. He's made it harder to be transgender or non-binary. I know this from personal experience. I'm non-binary and transgender, and I know how it's felt to be on the U of T campus for the last month. And I also know from private communications with other affected people. You know, in New Zealand, where I grew up, academics have a statutory role enshrined in the Education Act to be a critic and conscience of society. So I think that's an idea worth exporting to Canada. So I'd like to give Peterson about a B+ for his critic role recently, and an F for the conscience part. A student once said to me when I finally obtained tenure, "Now, Professor, now that you have obtained superpowers, you must agree to use them for good, for peace and justice." So I invite Peterson to start doing more of that.
Well, Professor Peterson, those who are asking for this alternate use of alternate pronouns, they are saying it boils down to respecting their human rights. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it boils down to respecting their human rights. I think that it's an imposition on freedom of speech that's being implemented at a legislative level. I also think that if there was a naturally evolving solution to the linguistic problem that's being posed by a small fraction of the transgender community, that people would have already adopted it. We've never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. Has a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. So, for example, we have legislation making it illegal to do such things as deny the Holocaust. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas. And I mean, it's also absurd. I mean, here's one thing that's happened that I don't believe the formulators of this legislation ever foresaw. So, in New York City, for example, there are now 31 protected gender identities, and I see no reason whatsoever why each of those gender identities can't demand the use of their own pronoun. And that absurd things like that have been happening on the University of Michigan campus, for example, where students have been given permission to tell faculty members and others what pronouns they're to be addressed by, and they're multiplying rapidly out of control. So the law is bad from an ethical perspective. It's sloppily written. And besides that, the solution that it imposes is practically untenable.
I got techniques dripping out my butt cheeks. Sleep on my stomach so I don't fuck up my sheets.
So my argument was, and this is an argument that was basically made by not just by Booker T. Washington, many others. They basically argued that slavery was a transmission belt. Slavery was evil, and it was terrible for the slaves. But they asked, what about the descendants of slaves who were subsequently born in America as opposed to being born, let's say, in Africa? Muhammad Ali, when he came back from the rumble in the jungle in Zaire, was asked by a reporter, hey, champ, what did you think of Africa? And he goes, thank God my granddaddy got on that boat. Now, this is Ali being very politically incorrect, but I think making a point that is worth considering. And that is to say that there is great value. We immigrants go through great difficulties to come into the orbit of Western freedom. So this is the complexity of the point I was making, that the slaves in America were worse off, but their descendants born in the orbit of American freedom in a land of opportunity are in fact better off.
So there's another point I want to get to here, which is, Dinesh, you have a movie that you put out, I think, in 20...
I'm glad you put that in context, by the way. I'm sure the slaves were so thankful. You made a cogent point there.
I said that...
Congratulations, you've been put in the orbit of freedom, ironically, through slavery. Hundreds of years of slavery. That is a curious orbit of freedom. Don't worry, though. Your great-grandkids one day might be free after I whip you, I own you, I kill you, I separate your family, I rape your wife. Bruh. After all that, your great-grandkids might be in the orbit of freedom. Why, thank you so much.
So I just finished saying that slavery was a terrible moral crime, and we have to distinguish the slaves from their descendants. That's what I did say. You weren't listening because you've trained your ear to jump before you think.
Hey, you guys want to do a poll of African Americans in this country and ask them if they should thank white people for slavery? How do you think that poll comes out, Dinesh?
I don't think anyone has ever said that.
Okay, but no, today they are the descendants who have been brought into the orbit of freedom. So according to your logic, they should be incredibly thankful. Let's do a poll. Let's find out.
Hold on a second.
Do you really believe these things, Dinesh? Or are you trying to get paid by right-wing guys who are paying you to say this nonsense?
Cenk, there are penniless Irish driven out by the potato famine who came starving to America. Their lives were actually, in many senses, worse. But their descendants, born here now in America, obviously enjoy freedoms that their ancestors didn't have. So I don't understand why you are, I mean, I don't know if you're being vile or being stupid, but it looks to me like it's some bizarre combination of the two. You refuse to try to understand what I'm saying.
No, I think I got it.
Another one.
So let me ask you in your own words, because you accuse people of putting words into your mouth or taking things out of context or not recognizing humor when it's there. What is your view on Islam?
As a gay man, I'm very comfortable with Donald Trump's statements, although he made a few different statements with varying degrees of firmness on this subject. I'd be very comfortable with a halt on Muslim immigration. I would wish that had happened in London. It isn't radical Islam, it's Islam that is the problem. That is my view. I don't particularly like the way that European cities are changing. I think Germany is a horror show. I think London has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And what happens in America matters for everybody else. What happens in America matters most, and I don't want America to go the same way.
Do you consider yourself a white nationalist?
No.
Isn't that what some people would think of when they hear of you don't like the changing face of places like London?
No, I'm talking about culture, not race.
Muslims coming in.
No, I'm talking about culture, not race, and it's typical of someone like the BBC to try to conflate the two, because
I'm
what they want to
asking you
do,
a question.
well, what they want to do is to suggest that if you're proud of your country and the ideals on which your country is founded, that somehow makes you a racist. It doesn't. I'm not talking about skin color. I don't care about skin color. All my boyfriends are black. I don't give a toss about skin color. What I do care about is values and ideas. And the regressive social attitudes of Muslims in the West are terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And organizations like yours won't report on them honestly, accurately, or fairly. It's left to other places to do it. And then what you do is, once you've failed to report on them accurately, is accuse people who are concerned with some justification about the changing nature of their culture, not race, in their countries, is you then accuse them of being white nationalists. That's pretty disgusting.
Let me be clear, I'm not accusing you of anything, I'm just asking.
If I was a white nationalist, it's one of those
It's
charges
a question,
that
not an
sit,
accusation.
Would you ask anyone that? Would you just go randomly asking anyone else, hi madam, I've never met you before, are you a white nationalist? No, you don't do that.
Well,
you're doing it because you want to suggest that there is something nefarious about my belief system. You're doing it because you want to associate my admiration for American ideals, my admiration for what happens in America, and saying that matters everywhere else, freedom, democracy, property, capital. You want to sort of associate that with race. I never did that. You did that.
The dominant narrative in America is white people are evil, white people suck, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And
I don't think we should be ashamed of ourselves. I think that we should take responsibility for the system that we've created.
The best system in the world?
Oh, we do not have the best system in the world.
Who has a better system?
There are many European countries that are much better off than us.
Oh, you mean like the European countries with a higher density of whites? Gotcha, like Northern Europe?
That's one way to phrase it, I guess.
You don't mean Turkey?
No.
You don't mean Eastern Europe?
No.
With the communists? So the only time you can come up with a system that's better than America, it's a country that's more white than America.
Gotcha, bitch.
I don't understand.
I don't know what to say to that, so.
Like, I just want to know where the data is that supports this universe of white supremacy. Is it because whites are doing well?
That makes it sound like whites are doing well because they earned it and they did all the right things, rather than we've built this country on a system for hundreds of years that allows whites to do well. We have generations that have supported our success, and we have taken away support from communities of color. So that is why communities of color are not doing well in America. It's not because white people are doing so well for themselves. We're just such a great people. I mean, I'm not...
So the reason whites are doing well is because we cheated?
Yeah.
But if you look at the data of Asians, for example, you will find way more Asian privilege than there is white privilege. Asians make way more money than whites. They're way more educated than whites. They are less likely to experience any kind of crime than whites are. They're less likely to die at work than whites are. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, they suffer from a different sort of racial stereotyping.
Well, they don't suffer. They're kicking our ass. Everything you can say about white privilege is more true with Asian privilege. No one grabs their purse when...
It still pigeonholes them.
Pardon?
It still pigeonholes them.
Pigeonholes them as successful? I don't think anyone minds being pigeonholed like that. Hey, Mr. Successful, why don't you go drive a nice car?
It's not near as harmful as how black folks are stereotyped, certainly.
Okay, so why don't you start at the top then, and let's try to dismantle Asian privilege.
Asian privilege, I wouldn't call it Asian privilege. privilege.
Well, it fits all the criteria of white male privilege.
What do you mean by that?
They get better jobs. They get better educations. They don't. No one sees them as threatening. Everything that you can say that whites cheated to get is more prevalent in an Asian society.
And another one.
40% of the police officers who were killed in the line of duty were killed by young black men. It is only reasonable sometimes, not saying this is bad, sometimes it is reasonable for a police officer to handle black men with a little bit more caution than it is for a 5'2" Chinese man, for instance. Because statistically, they're not committing violent crimes. Statistically, they're not killing cops. Now, for instance, okay, so if a police officer pull over an Arab in Manhattan, right? No, let me just put one. Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Most of the mass shootings in this country, when was the last one that was done by a black person?
The Dallas sniper.
I'm talking I'm talking about mass shootings of innocent people. I'm talking about the police. I'm not saying that was a good thing. So if we have all these mass shootings of people with guns killing children and killing innocent people, why aren't we more suspicious of white folks carrying around guns?
Well, they are. I mean, white people. White people. The thing is, when we're talking about black crime and white crime, we're talking about proportionality, right? No. So here's the thing, right? So I think it was about 5,000 or 3,000. 5,000. Are you talking about police killings or just white on white violence?
I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about people responsible for mass shootings in this country.
Let me ask you a question. How many mass shootings occur as opposed to just killings on the streets of our cities? And what would you say the ratio of, say, a mass shooting to a shooting in a neighborhood?
Okay, well, I can't argue with you statistics.
You're saying you're wanting to focus on these mass shootings and they're not being committed by black people, but you want to ignore everything, all of that, as if it's more important.
I just want a black person walking down the street to be treated the same way as a white person walking down the street.
You've been African American, because you seem to know a lot more than these gentlemen about being black.
I live in a community with black and African American friends.
You have black friends? I do too.
But are you going to say that black people can walk down the street and say
absolutely. Depending on where you live.
It depends on where you live. It depends on where you live.
It just depends.
Right.
So you're going to tell me that women don't hold their purses closer, or you don't lock your door when you're going through a black neighborhood? Do you do that when you're driving through a white neighborhood?
Have you seen how I've been carrying my purse out here with 1,000 people I don't know? I'm not as any more concerned around all these people I don't know of all these nationalities than I am anywhere else.
But the thing is,
lady, I've been walking around and people have been telling me I don't know what I've been talking about all day.
But the point is this: most crime is black on black. It's black on black.
About black on black.
All right. It is a huge problem.
It's not the cops.
If we could reduce the main point is if we could reduce the amount of black on black crime and violent crime committed by blacks, it will reduce the perception of a threat when it comes down to how people are perceived. Black people are perceived in America.
You really think that Mr. Trump cares about you?
He's hired more black people than probably you have. Hired more Latinos, more Muslims than anybody else has.
But he insults them all the time.
Insults black people or Muslims, women?
Women. He's just he insults anybody who doesn't agree with him.
What about all the money?
Obama's killed more Muslims than Donald Trump has. Just
we can't have a rational conversation. You know what?
Obama has killed more Muslims than Donald Trump has. Extrajudicially, he has killed more Muslims.
You guys argue that he should be more aggressive.
I didn't argue that.
Killed Osama bin Laden.
Well,
You got no credit for that. That was a good thing.
he did. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. That was his credit. And then he ended up going to destroy Syria. And now
He destroyed Syria?
Oh yeah, yes, him.
Well, how did he destroy Syria?
The limited airstrikes that Vladimir Putin told him not to do. China said, hey,
So you like Putin?
I don't. Well, there are things that I do like about Putin. He doesn't like to go and invade countries and destabilize them. One of the things I like about Putin is the fact that he understands that the Western presidents historically, at least from Clinton all the way to Bush, we have been toppling a lot of dictators that are democratically elected. The mullahs, the Muslim Brotherhood that was put into power after the military coup. That was another one that Vladimir Putin warned against, and we did it anyways. And then now this whole invade and invite theory.
Because I don't want to listen to this anymore. But I'm just going to say, let me just tell you, I will be really glad when you guys are all done and you leave. And Ohio can go ahead and vote against Trump because he's going to lose here. And nobody wins the presidency without winning Ohio.